I saw a message on his phone. That day, he came home early for a change and was taking a shower in the bathroom. The phone screen lit up. I didn't intend to look, but the moment that name popped up, my fingers moved before my brain did. Vanessa. Lucas, I'm pregnant. I didn't tap to open it. The lock screen only showed those 7 words. I stood there, still holding the cloth I was using to wipe down the dining table. The rag fell to the floor. I didn't pick it up. The water was running in the bathroom, and he was humming a tune, in a good mood. It suddenly hit me that this afternoon he had texted, "Coming home early tonight, I miss you." I thought he had finally wised up, so I simmered his favorite pork rib soup. I picked up the rag, folded it, and placed it back in the sink. Then I picked up his phone and pressed my thumb against the home button. The screen unlocked. I had no idea when he had registered my fingerprint. Maybe one day while I was asleep, he had taken my hand and pressed it there. Maybe even earlier. I opened that message. Lucas, I'm pregnant. I'm too scared to go to the hospital alone. Can you come with me? Scrolling up, there were 6 months of chat history. They went on dates more often than we did. An apartment in Sanliton, a restaurant in Blue Harbor, late-night voice calls. He called her Nessa, and she called him Lucas. He had transferred money to her, small amounts, with the note, "Buy yourself something nice to eat." I scrolled further up and found January 9th, "Lucas, thank you for spending my birthday with me today. I was so happy. It was the best birthday gift I've ever received." He replied, "Whatever makes you happy." On that birthday, he said he was on a business trip. I ate alone, watched a movie, then went home, washed up, and went to bed. I put the phone back where it was, screen facing down. The sound of water in the bathroom stopped. He came out drying his hair, saw me sitting on the sofa, and froze for a moment. "What's wrong? You look terrible." "Nothing," I said. "The pork rib soup is ready. Have some." He laughed and came over to ruffle my hair. "I knew you were the best." I walked into the kitchen and ladled out soup for him. My hands were steady. Suddenly, I remembered the day he got promoted last year. He'd had too much to drink and held me, saying, "Samantha, once I'm on solid ground, we'll get married." I cried in his arms, feeling like it was all worth it. Turns out, the solid ground he meant wasn't his career. It was having a foothold on both sides. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat on the balcony and thought for a long time. I didn't cry. I was just thinking, 7 years ago when he was chasing me, he rode his bike from the east side of the city to the west side to bring me soy milk. His hands were red from the cold, and he said, "Drink it quick, it's still warm." That winter was so short, I thought my whole life would be this warm. Later, he got busier and busier. Graduate school exams, internships, work. I stayed up late with him, helped him revise his resume, and took care of his sick mother. During the 2 weeks his mother was in the hospital, I took leave to bring her meals every day. He was on a business trip and sent me a message saying, "You've worked hard." I never thought it was hard. I just didn't know that when he was on that business trip, Vanessa was standing by his side. At 2 in the morning, I went back to the room. He was sleeping soundly, his hand resting on my pillow. I looked at him for a long time, and then I made a decision. It's not forgiveness. It's not revenge. It's leaving. But before that, I want to know one thing: did he ever truly love me, or was I just a stepping stone? The next day, while he was at work, I opened the locked drawer at home. Not the one in his study. The one at the very bottom of the bedroom wardrobe, hidden beneath his old clothes he never wore. I had never opened it before. Inside was a diary, with a black cover, only half filled. I opened it and checked the date. April 3rd, got criticized by the boss at today's meeting. "Samantha always says it's okay, take it slow, but I don't want to hear that. What I need is someone who can push me forward. Vanessa said she believes I can do it." The way she looked at me made me feel like I still have it in me to fight. May 17th, Samantha was hospitalized, and I went to see her. She was asleep, so I didn't get to meet her. Vanessa insisted on coming along, saying she wanted to visit our senior. I couldn't say no. She's been getting more and more clingy lately. June 20th, Vanessa asked if I would break up with Samantha. I said no. She cried. I don't want to see her cry, but I also don't want to break up with Samantha. Samantha is my bottom line. No matter what happens, I won't cross that line. July 9th, Samantha said she wants to start a public account. She's never made a decision for herself before, so I should be happy. But I'm afraid she'll change. If she becomes someone who doesn't need me anymore, what will I do? I closed the diary and put it back in its place. He doesn't not love me. He just loves himself more. He needs a bottom line to prove he's not a bad person. He needs Vanessa to prove he still has charm. He needs 2 women to prove he has choices in life. He nailed me to the position of bottom line, not because I'm the most important, but because I'm the safest. I know everything about him, from a poor student to a 6-figure salary earner. I've seen him at his most disheveled and walked with him through the hardest times. So he will never leave me, that's his greatest confidence. And Vanessa is his fantasy of possibility. Suddenly, I felt exhausted. It's not mental exhaustion, it's the kind of fatigue that seeps out from the marrow of your bones. I spent 7 years becoming someone's bottom line. Not the one they loved most, not the one and only, just the bare minimum. Enough. I reached the overpass at 4 in the afternoon. The wind was strong, whipping my hair across my face. I climbed over the railing and sat on the edge. My legs dangled in midair, the traffic roaring beneath me. I didn't want to die. I just wanted to feel the wind. But when I stood up, my center of gravity wavered. My fingers only grazed the cold rust. The fall was brief. Wind rushed into my ears, and I could hear my own heartbeat, along with someone shouting in the distance. The last sound I heard was my own voice, very soft, as if speaking only to myself. If I could do it over, I would never be anyone's last line of defense. I was actually reborn. The first second my consciousness returned, I smelled disinfectant. Pungent, cold, as familiar as if I had just smelled it yesterday. I snapped my eyes open, the fluorescent light blindingly bright. A retention needle was stuck in my arm, and the heart monitor beeped steadily. On the bedside table sat a thermos, with a sticky note pressed underneath. Samantha, I'm going home to grab some clean clothes. I'll be back later to keep you company. The date at the bottom right of the sticky note, May 17, 2015. I stared at that date for a long time. 2nd semester of junior year, emergency appendectomy surgery. I remember that day. I remember Lucas was going to visit that afternoon, remember the underclassman in a white dress standing beside him, remember her smiling and saying, "Hi senior, I'm Vanessa." I remember smiling back and saying, "Hey, thanks for coming to see me." In my past life, I thought that was our first meeting. But the message I saw on the phone, that I'm pregnant, the contact name Nessa, those late-night voice messages, they all lingered in my mind, as vivid as if they happened yesterday. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of disinfectant crept into my nostrils. I remembered this scent. In my past life, I woke up on this hospital bed and thought it was the smell of life. Now, breathing it in again, it only felt cold. The door was pushed open. Sebastian walked in, carrying fruit in his hand. When he saw my eyes open, his brow relaxed slightly. Awake? Has the anesthesia worn off? Brother. If anyone comes to see me, help me keep them out, I said. If Lucas brings anyone else, have them wait at the door. Don't let them in. Sebastian looked at me, didn't ask why, just said, okay. I closed my eyes again. At 3 in the afternoon, footsteps echoed in the hallway. I heard Sebastian open the door, heard him speaking at the doorway, his voice kept low. A few seconds later, the door closed, and the footsteps faded away. Sebastian walked back and stood by the bed. A man, with a girl, he said. I told them you'd just fallen asleep, asked them to come back later. The man was carrying red date cake, the girl had a fruit basket. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. The red date cake was for me. The fruit basket was Vanessa's kindness. It was all the same. Exactly the same as in my past life. Bro, I said, from now on, if he comes, just turn him away from me. Sebastian was silent for a few seconds. Did you break up? Almost. He glanced at me, then opened the thermos. Drink the soup first. The soup was scalding hot. So hot it made my eyes sting. But I didn't let the tears fall. In my past life, I had cried in this very hospital room. Back then, Lucas said, when you get better, I'll take you out for good food, and I was moved to tears. Now that I think about it, it was just an empty pleasantry. He had said the same thing to Vanessa, to clients, to anyone at all. On the day of my discharge, the sun was bright. Vivian came to pick me up, a lollipop dangling from her mouth as she leaned against the dormitory building, waiting for me. When she saw me, she looked me up and down and said, "You've lost weight." Appendicitis. Got it removed. I'm talking about your face. She leaned in to look at me. Your eyes are different. Different how? Can't quite put it into words. She thought for a moment. Before, you always looked at people with a smile, as if you were afraid of making them unhappy. Now you don't smile anymore. I didn't respond. Vivian was my best friend from college, with a personality so straightforward it bordered on reckless. In my past life, I told her everything, but when she advised me to break up, I didn't listen. In this life, I don't plan to let her worry about me. Vivian, I said, I want to start a WeChat public account. Huh? Writing about the psychological rebuilding of professional women. Could you ask around if you know any editors? She chewed on her lollipop and stared at me for a few seconds. All right. But why the sudden interest in this? Because I want to make money, I said. Not for anyone else. For myself. Vivian laughed. Now that's something I like to hear. On the third day after my rebirth, Lucas came. He was wearing a white shirt with the cuffs rolled up to his forearms, his hair meticulously styled. Carrying a bag of fruit, he stood at the entrance of the dormitory building, sunlight falling on his face. He still looked like that confident, spirited vice president of the student council. Samantha, he said with a smile as he walked over. Why didn't you tell me when you were discharged from the hospital? I would have come to pick you up. My brother took it. What's been going on with you lately? He frowned. You don't reply to messages, you don't answer calls. Is it because you haven't fully recovered from the surgery? I looked at him. His eyes were sincere. Concern, worry, a hint of hurt, his expression was perfectly managed. If I hadn't seen him 7 years from now, I would have definitely softened. Lucas, I said, that junior you mentioned last time, Vanessa, has she been looking for you recently? His expression froze for a fraction of a second. What's wrong? He gave a slight smile. She sometimes asks me about student council matters. What's the matter? Nothing, I said. Just asking. I wasn't going to call him out. Not because I was afraid, but because it would be pointless. He would apologize, make promises, cry, and say he was just momentarily confused. Then I would forgive him, and he would keep doing it. It's his instinct, something he can't control. Just like a cat steals fish, not because it's bad, but because it's a cat. What I can do isn't to teach the cat not to steal fish. It's to kick the cat out the door. I've been really busy lately, I said. Internship, WeChat public account, major courses. You don't need to come see me every day from now on. What about meals? Can we at least have dinner together once a week? We'll see. He stood there, his smile finally faltering. Samantha, are you mad at me? He asked. I've been a bit busy lately, but I'm working hard for our future. Can you be a little more understanding? I've been understanding for 7 years. I understand, I said. So you do your thing, and I'll do mine. When you're not busy anymore, we'll talk then. I turned and walked into the dormitory building. Behind me, he called out, Samantha, but I didn't look back. As I went upstairs, my palms were drenched in sweat. It wasn't nervousness. It was holding myself back from turning around. In that moment, I really wanted to turn back. I wanted to run over and hug him, say I was just kidding. Because he was still wearing those sneakers I gave him, white, washed until they turned yellow. He was still using that phone case I gave him, the corners worn out but he wouldn't replace it. These little details soften the heart. But I remembered that line from the diary, Samantha is my bottom line. I'm not anyone's first choice. I'm just someone's fallback option. In June, I officially started running my public account. The name is Second Act, with the slogan Life Can Restart, starting from the moment you stop being someone else's accessory. The first post had a simple title, Why I Quit the Good Girlfriend Job. It was a fictional story, but the core was real. A girl suddenly realized she had been treating being a girlfriend like a job, with performance metrics based on how fast he replied to messages, how many holidays he remembered, and how often he mentioned her in front of friends. She quit and started paying herself a salary. The day it was posted, the read count was only 47. Vivian shared it, Lindsay shared it, and Sebastian shared it with the caption, My sister wrote this, take a look. Gavin showed up around the third post. That day I wrote that the term independent woman is being misused. The point was simple, true independence isn't about not spending a man's money, it's about being able to bear the consequences of your choices. The comments section erupted into chaos. Some called me a radical feminist, while others said I was being gaslit and still counting money for the abuser. At 1 a.m, I received a private message. The profile picture was a book cover, the username Yen. The message had only one line, there's a logic flaw in the third paragraph. You said independence is bearing consequences, but consequences can be good or bad. Everyone wants to bear the good ones, the truly hard part is enduring the bad. I clicked into his profile. No posts, no bio, just a dozen book-related accounts he followed. I replied, what do you mean by bad consequences? He replied instantly, choosing the wrong person means admitting you chose wrong. That's harder than any consequence. I didn't reply again. But those words stuck with me. In July, during the alumni banquet. In my past life, I dressed up meticulously, held Lucas's arm as I walked in, and played the role of a perfect couple in front of everyone. Vanessa was there too that night, in a champagne-colored gown, standing in a corner. I even took the initiative to pull her over to sit with us. Not this time around. I wore a black dress with no accessories. When I arrived at the venue, Lucas was already chatting with an alumnus. Seeing me, he walked over and reached out to put his arm around my waist. I sidestepped to avoid him. His hand froze in midair. Quite a crowd here, I said. Let's be mindful of appearances. He gave a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Halfway through the dinner, Vanessa arrived. She was wearing a figure-hugging champagne-colored gown with exquisite makeup. The first thing she did upon entering was look at Lucas. Then she quickly looked away and walked toward us with a smile. Senior, Lucas. She stood beside Lucas, her voice as soft as cotton candy. I came alone and don't know anyone. Lucas instinctively shifted half a step to the side. I saw that move clearly. It wasn't to create distance from Vanessa, it was to create distance from me. In front of a younger, prettier girl, his girlfriend had become something inconvenient to display. There are a few juniors over there. You can go chat with them, Lucas said. Vanessa bit her lower lip. I don't dare go alone, Lucas. Will you come with me? After she finished speaking, she glanced at me, her eyes carrying just the right amount of apology. In my past life, I would have smiled and said, go ahead. Today, I smiled and said, he's not great at socializing. Last time he came with me to an event, he kept a cold face the whole time and almost offended someone. How about I introduce you to a few senior girls instead? I raised my hand and called Lindsay over. Lindsay walked up, glanced at Vanessa, then at me, and raised an eyebrow. You're junior? Yeah, help her out a bit. Lindsay smiled. Let's go, junior. Before Vanessa was taken away, she turned back to glance at Lucas. That look wasn't one of grievance, it was calculation. I saw it very clearly. After the banquet ended, Lucas walked me back to the dorm. Under the streetlight, he suddenly stopped. Samantha, did you do that on purpose today? On purpose about what? You sent Vanessa away. You never used to do that. I turned to look at him. The streetlight fell across his face, his expression complicated, confusion, displeasure, and a hint of tension I had never seen before. He was afraid. Not that I would discover something, but that my uncooperativeness would tarnish his image. In front of Vanessa, he needed a generous and considerate girlfriend to prove his charm. And today, I hadn't played along with the act, which rattled him. I didn't send her away, I said. I just thought you were too busy, so I helped lighten your load. I'm not busy. You're not busy? I chuckled. Then where were you last Wednesday night? His expression changed. The library, he said. I told you. Oh, I said. Maybe I remembered wrong. I turned and walked away. He didn't follow. That night, I wrote an article titled "The busy he talks about and the busy you understand are not the same word." It didn't go viral. Just over 300 reads. But that user named Yen showed up again. He commented, "This piece is restrained. Restraint is harder than provocation." I clicked into his profile. This time, he had posted a status update with just 4 words, "Currently reading." The attached image was a book about content entrepreneurship. In August, I met Gavin for the first time. It wasn't a chance encounter, nor an introduction through friends, it was a business setting. Gavin Media was signing a new batch of content creators, and my public account had caught the eye of their business team. I went to their office that day, and while waiting at the front desk, someone walked out from inside. A black shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, holding a thermos in his hand. He saw me and paused mid-step. I recognized him, the keynote speaker from the sharing session, Gavin. "You're the one who runs that public account," he said, not a question. "You're the one who said, the real problem isn't who you meet, but whether you have the ability to leave the wrong person," I replied. He looked at me for 2 seconds, the corner of his mouth twitching, whether it counted as a smile, I couldn't tell. "If you sign, you'll need to adjust your content direction," he said. "Too many people are doing emotional content, you can't compete with those professional writers. Your strength is your industry background, a perspective from journalism and communication studies, plus your personal experience. Focus on psychological rebuilding for career women. No one's taken that niche yet." "How do you know my major?" "You wrote it in your first post." He took a sip from his thermos. The author majored in journalism and communication in college, and 3 years after graduation, I started reflecting on what this course actually taught me. "You wrote it in great detail, it didn't sound made up." I was stunned. When I posted that tweet, it only had 47 views, he saw it, and he remembered. "You've been following me for a long time?" I asked. "I started reading from the 3rd post," he said. "The one where you wrote independence means bearing the consequences." The logic was flawed. So it was him. "You're Yen?" He neither denied nor admitted it, simply saying, "If you sign the contract, you'll update daily." "Can you do it?" "I can." "Good. I'll personally handle your account." With that, he turned and walked away, his figure quickly disappearing at the end of the corridor. The front desk girl whispered, "Mr. Gavin rarely handles accounts personally." "You're the 3rd one." "What about the first 2? One quit, the other got married." I smiled. This person was interesting. In September, I officially broke up with Lucas. It wasn't a big fight. It was in the school cafeteria, as he sat across from me with his tray and said, "Samantha, my mom asked when you're coming over for dinner." I said, "We're not right for each other. Let's break up." The chopsticks in his hand froze midair. "What did you say?" "Break up," I said. "Go find someone who can have meals with you, go shopping with you, and always be there when you need them. That person isn't me." "Samantha, what the hell is wrong with you?" His voice dropped, but it couldn't suppress the anger. "Did someone say something to you? Was it Vanessa? Did she give you trouble?" I looked at him. His first reaction wasn't "What did I do wrong?" It was "Who ratted me out?" That reaction alone said everything. "No one told me anything." I picked up my tray and stood up. "I just don't want to keep going anymore." "Are you crazy?" He stood up, his voice rising. People around us started looking over. "We've been together for 3 years, and you just decide you don't want to keep going? Give me a reason." I looked at him. The cafeteria lights were bright, making his face look pale. His hands were trembling, his eyes red. People were watching, whispering among themselves. He was genuinely sad. Not pretending. But this sadness wasn't because he loved me, it was because in his script, the scene where Samantha breaks up with him was never supposed to happen. In his plan, I was supposed to stay by his side until he decided whether or not to marry me. Today, my non-cooperation made him lose control over this relationship. What he was sad about was losing control, not losing me. You already know the reasons, I said. You just don't want to admit it. I carried my tray and walked away. Behind me, the sound of a tray slamming onto the table echoed loudly. I didn't look back. That afternoon, I wrote an article titled "Breaking Up Doesn't Need a Valid Reason." Many people think that the one initiating a breakup must provide a sufficiently serious reason: cheating, domestic violence, deception. But in reality, the most valid reason is I don't want to continue anymore. You don't need to prove that they're bad enough, you just need to admit that you're tired enough. The user named Yen didn't comment. But he sent me a private message with just 2 words, "You okay?" I thought for a long time, then replied with 2 words, "Not bad." This is our conversational style. Few words, but we understand each other. In October, something happened. Vanessa was pregnant. It wasn't my guess, she told me herself. That day she asked me out for coffee. She was wearing a loose hoodie and light makeup, still looking like that well-behaved junior student. She sat across from me, holding her cup with both hands, and was silent for a long time with her head down. Then she said, "Senior, I'm pregnant." I looked at her. The child's father is Lucas. Her voice was very soft. He doesn't know. I didn't tell him. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. She lifted her head, her eyes reddening. "Senior, I'm not here to beg for your blessing. I just don't know who else to talk to. I have no other friends. Everyone thinks I'm some manipulative bitch who deliberately got close to Lucas. But I genuinely like him." Her tears fell, one by one, hitting the table. "I know he doesn't like me." She let out a bitter smile. "He just finds me novel. Once he gets bored, he'll go back to you. Senior, you're his bottom line." Bottom line. That word again. I set down my coffee cup and looked at her face. She was genuinely in pain, not pretending. Her suffering was as real as Lucas's grief, but that didn't mean she was innocent. She chose a man who already had a girlfriend. She chose to get closer to him while he was hesitating. She chose to come and tell me she was pregnant, instead of telling him. Every step of the way, it was a choice. "Have you ever thought about being born?" I asked. She shook her head. "Are you going to tell him?" She shook her head again. "Then are you telling me this because you want me to help you tell him?" She lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes filled with complex emotions. I understand. She wasn't asking me to tell. She was asking me to make a decision. If I told Lucas, he would face a choice; if I didn't, she would handle it herself. Either way, she wouldn't have to bear the label of the informant. She came to confess in order to hand the choice over to me. That way, no matter how things turned out, she would always be the one who was pitiful, victimized, and abandoned. I looked at her face and suddenly felt exhausted. It wasn't hatred. It was pity. She, like me, had spent too much thought on someone unworthy. Only I chose to walk away, while she chose to sink deeper. "Vanessa," I said, "I'm not going to tell Lucas about this for you. You'll have to make that decision yourself. But let me tell you one thing, you're not his backup plan, you're just another option. In his heart, we're all options, not the answer." She froze. I got up and left. As I stepped out, my hands were trembling. Not from nervousness. It was because I remembered my past life. Vanessa had been pregnant in that life too, but that was 3 years later. That time, she didn't come to me, she went straight to Lucas. Lucas told her to get an abortion, and she did, but from then on, she used it to blackmail him. The rest of the story was me finding the photos, the diary, everything in his study. I don't know if she will choose a different path in this life. But I do know that I won't be dragged into it again. In November, Gavin noticed something was off with me. During a company meeting that day, I spaced out 3 times. He didn't say anything on the spot, but after the meeting, he messaged me to come to his office. When I walked in, he was looking at a document without even lifting his head. "Sit down." I sat on the sofa, waiting for him to finish reading. He put down the documents and looked at me. "The quality of your recent drafts has been declining." "I know." "Reason?" "Personal matter." He was silent for a few seconds. "Letting personal matters affect work, that's your concern. But if you can't keep writing, I can have someone take over updating for a week. Come back once you've sorted yourself out." I looked at him. His expression was calm, without sympathy or curiosity, just stating facts. This attitude made me feel safe. He wouldn't ask what's wrong, or say, "You need to rest," he simply offered a solution. "No need to change it," I said. "I can write." "Okay." He lowered his head to continue reading the documents, then suddenly looked up again. "That piece, breaking up, doesn't need a valid reason. I read it 3 times. I was taken aback. "The 3rd paragraph, you said the most legitimate reason is not wanting to continue anymore," he said. "I thought about it for a long time and felt you missed a point." "What point?" "You don't want to continue because you've finally seen what lies beyond continuing," he said. "This isn't emotion, it's reason. You don't have to dress it up as impulse." I looked at him. He was right. I thought "I don't want to continue anymore" was an emotion, being tired, weary, unwilling to endure any longer. But what he meant was, "This is calculation. It's you weighing the cost of going on and finding it not worth it. This isn't emotion, it's reason." "Gavin," I said, "do you ever feel like you're sometimes too rational?" He thought for a moment. "Yes, there is. But rationality isn't a flaw, not knowing how to use it is." This was the first time I felt that this person might have his own issues too. Too rational, too restrained, too inexpressive. Every word he said was right, but being right itself was the problem. Since when is there so much right in matters of the heart? In December, my parents came. Not to see me, but to see Lucas. My mom called and said, "Your brother told me you two had a fight recently? Your dad and I are coming over to check on you, and we'll have dinner with Lucas while we're at it." I tried to refuse, but my mom wouldn't listen. The dinner was arranged at a restaurant near the school. Lucas arrived half an hour early, wearing a suit with his hair gelled, looking like he was heading to a job interview. My parents had always had a good impression of him, attending a prestigious school, decent-looking, from a well-off family, and good to me. "Lucas, have you been busy with your studies lately?" my dad asked. "It's going well, Uncle. I pretty much finished reviewing for the graduate entrance exam. Samantha has been busy with her public account lately too. You two should support each other." My mom smiled as she looked at me. "She's never been very good at taking care of herself since she was little. Please look out for her." Lucas glanced at me and smiled gently. "Auntie, don't worry. I'll take care of her." I lowered my head to drink my soup and said nothing. This meal lasted 2 hours. My parents chatted with Lucas the entire time, and I felt like a guest. As we were leaving, my mother took my hand and said, "Lucas is a good kid. Don't always throw tantrums." I stood at the restaurant entrance, watching them get into the car. The wind blew, and it was very cold. I wanted to say, "Mom, he has another woman," wanted to say, "He got another woman pregnant," wanted to say, "He never really loved me." But I didn't. Because if I said it, my mom would believe me. Then she would cry, feel sorry for me, and lose sleep. And then all of this would become her burden, not his. My own choice, I'll bear it myself. That evening, Gavin sent a message, "Have you come up with a new topic yet?" I replied, "I've thought it through." "Right, the person your parents like may not necessarily be right for you." He replied instantly, "This title is too long. Change it." I thought for a moment, they think he's good, but I'm the one wearing the shoes. Pass. In late December, on the day Lucas finished his postgraduate entrance exam, he came to find me downstairs at the dormitory. He had lost a lot of weight, and his eyes were bloodshot. He was wearing a wrinkled hoodie, the same one I gave him during my freshman year, now washed to a faded white. "Finished the exam?" I asked. "It's over." He looked at me. "Samantha, can we talk?" We went to the cafe by the west gate of the school. He ordered an Americano, and I ordered a latte. Snow began to fall outside the window, tiny flakes that melted the moment they touched the glass. "I know about Vanessa," he said suddenly. I didn't say anything. "She came to see me. Said she was pregnant and had already had the procedure." His hand gripped the cup, knuckles turning white. "She said she told you." "Yeah. Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him. His expression was a complex mix of emotions, anger, hurt, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite make out. "Tell you what?" I asked. "Tell you she's pregnant, and then what will you do? Stay with her? Or beg for my forgiveness?" He opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. "You can't do anything," I said. "You can only choose one. But you don't want to choose. So you want me to make the decision." He fell silent. Outside the window, the snow grew heavier, settling on the windowsill in a thin layer. "Samantha, I know I'm a jerk," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I really love you. Vanessa means nothing to me, she's just..." "Just what?" "Just makes me feel alive." I looked into his eyes and suddenly understood. He didn't not love me. He just loved the version of himself on the rise more. He needed Vanessa to prove he still had charm, was still young, still had options. He needed me to prove that someone had his back, someone was waiting, someone would treat him well without counting the cost. We were the two fulcrums for him to confirm his self-worth. Without one, he would lose balance. But that doesn't mean he loves me. It just means he needs me. "Lucas," I said, "you don't love me. You're just used to me." His eyes reddened. "Is there a difference?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Habits can be changed. Love cannot." I stood up and left. As I stepped out, snow fell on my shoulders, melting quickly. I didn't look back. In January, my public account broke through 100,000 followers. It wasn't thanks to a viral hit, it was thanks to daily updates. 180 days, 180 articles, not a single day missed. The worst performing piece had only 200 reads, an article titled "A Methodology for Public Account Layout." But I didn't delete it, because that article was passed along by an editor to their team as training material. Gavin said, "That's right. Going viral is luck, posting daily is skill." I started receiving business collaborations. The first was a commissioned article from a women's workplace community app, with a fee of 3,000 yuan. When I got the money, I transferred 2,000 to Sebastian, saying, "This pays back your hospital bills." He didn't accept it and replied, "You've made it." The second was an invitation from a publishing house, wanting to publish a book. The theme was self-reconstruction of women in the workplace. I spent 3 days writing a proposal and sent it to Gavin. After reading it, he replied with 4 words, "You can sign." I signed. On the night I signed, I cried in my rented room. Not because I was happy. It was because I remembered my past life. At this time in my past life, I was accompanying Lucas as he prepared for his graduate school exams. I cooked for him every day, did his laundry, organized his materials. I sent my resume out to one company after another, but never heard back. It wasn't that there were no replies, it was that I barely sent any out at all. Because all my energy was spent on him. I looked at the newly deposited payment for my manuscript in my bank account and suddenly found it absurd. So this is how easy it is to make money. So this is what it's like to live a different kind of life, just by spending on yourself the time you used to spend on others. In February, Vanessa dropped out. Lindsay was the one who told me. She skipped too many classes this semester and failed several courses. The school issued a warning, and she voluntarily applied for a leave of absence. Lindsay finished speaking and glanced at me. "Did you already know something?" "Know what?" "About her and Lucas." I was silent for a few seconds. "Yes. You're not angry? I thought about it. Angry? In my past life, I was so furious I wanted to kill her. But in this life, I realized I couldn't muster that anger anymore. Not because I'm magnanimous, but because I no longer care. When you stop caring about someone, what does it matter how many women they have outside? Not angry, I said. Just a pity, that's all. A pity for what? It's a pity she put so much effort into snatching someone who wasn't worth snatching. Lindsay looked at me for a few seconds and smiled. Samantha, you've changed. Changed how? Before, you always used to say I think, maybe, perhaps, she said. Now you don't beat around the bush anymore. I was taken aback. She was right. I used to speak with uncertainty, afraid of offending others, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of making people unhappy. Now I'm not afraid anymore. It's not that saying the wrong thing won't offend people, it's that I'm no longer afraid of offending them. In early March, Lucas came to see me once. He had failed his graduate school entrance exam, missing the cutoff by 7 points. He was offered a transfer to an ordinary school but decided not to go, opting instead to try again. Standing downstairs from my apartment, his coat was wrinkled, and his hair was a mess from the wind. Samantha, I've thought about it a lot, he said. You were right. I don't love you, I'm just used to you. But in these 6 months without you, I've realized I don't even have that habit anymore. You will, I said. It's just a matter of time. Don't you hate me? I thought about it. Hate? No. He was just someone who made the wrong choices at critical junctures. He chose Vanessa, chose to run away, chose to avoid facing things. Those choices cost him me, cost him Vanessa, cost him his chance at graduate school. What did he gain? Nothing at all. He's already been punished. That punishment wasn't something I gave him, it was something he chose for himself. I don't hate you, I said. Lucas, just focus on preparing for your exams. You don't hate me because you don't love me anymore, do you? I looked into his eyes. There was regret, reluctance, and expectation in them. But no love. He wanted me to hate him, because hate means I still care. Not even giving him hate, that's what truly ends things. Yeah, I said. I don't love you anymore. He stood there, the wind lifting the hem of his coat. He didn't say a word, turned around, and walked away. This time, his back was straight. He didn't look back. April. Gavin was drunk. At the company annual party, he had been plied with a lot of alcohol. When it was over, he stood by the door, his face flushed, but his expression still wore that aloof look. When people spoke to him, he nodded and said not a word more. After everyone had left, he was still standing there. I walked over. Are you okay? He glanced at me. I'm fine. You can't walk in a straight line. I can. He took 3 steps and nearly walked into a fire hydrant. I steadied him. I'll take you back. He leaned heavily against my shoulder. His breath carried the scent of alcohol and a faint hint of mint. Neither of us spoke. The taxi ride was silent the whole way, save for an old song playing on the radio. When we reached his apartment building, he suddenly spoke. Samantha. I'm happy today. Because of the year-end party? Because of your book, he said. The publisher passed the final review. It'll be out next month. I was taken aback. He had told me about this earlier this afternoon. I thought he'd forgotten, but he actually remembered. Not only did he remember, he was happy about it. You don't have to drink this much just because you're happy, I said. I'm not very good at being happy, he said, his voice low. I'm not very good at a lot of things. I looked at him. Under the streetlight, his face was very red, but his eyes were bright. He didn't look like a company boss, nor like someone who could command the industry. He was just a 30-year-old man who wasn't very good at expressing his feelings. Gavin, have you ever thought about one thing? I asked. What? You're too rational. So rational that you don't know how to handle emotions. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, I know. My ex-wife said the same thing. Ex-wife. Those two words left me stunned. He had never mentioned it before. You were married? I asked. Married for 2 years, divorced for 3, he said. She said I was a suitable life partner, but not a suitable lover. He said this in a very calm tone, as if talking about someone else's business. But I saw his hand clench into a fist. Gavin. I'm fine, he interrupted me. You should go back. You still have to submit your manuscript tomorrow. He turned and went upstairs without looking back. I stood there, watching his figure disappear into the stairwell. The wind blew, and it was cold. Suddenly, I realized something. I had thought that after my rebirth, I would meet a perfect person to make up for the regrets of my past life. But Gavin is not perfect. He is rational, restrained, inexpressive, and not good at handling emotions. His ex-wife left him not because she didn't love him, but because she was too exhausted. Is someone like this really right for me? I don't know. But I want to try. Not because he is the right one, but because I want to try with him. In May, my book was published. The title was The Second Act, A Woman's Self-Reconstruction. The launch party was held at a bookstore, with several dozen people in attendance. Gavin sat in the last row and remained silent throughout. During the book signing session, a reader asked me, "You write so much about independence and self-reconstruction, is it because you've been through heartbreak?" Someone in the audience laughed. I laughed too. Yes. But it's not because the heartbreak itself is worth writing about, it's because how to move on is worth writing about. Have you moved on? I thought about it. Had I moved on? The wounds from my past life were still there, but they no longer hurt. Not because they had scabbed over, but because they truly no longer ached. New skin had grown over that spot, no different from anyone else's. I've moved on, I said. But not because of time, because of choice. After the press conference ended, Gavin walked over and handed me a file folder. What's this? Open it and take a look. I opened it, and inside was a contract. Gavin Culture Media wanted to sign a long-term cooperation agreement with my studio, with a profit split of 70% for me and 30% for him. Are you crazy? I said. You're losing money on this. I won't lose, he said. Your account can reach 500,000 followers next year. I've calculated it. How do you know? Because I've calculated it. He looked at me. Samantha, I'm not good with words. But I'm good with numbers. I calculate what you're worth, what I can offer, and what we can achieve together. I've calculated all of this very clearly. I looked at him. His expression was still that cold demeanor, but his ears were red. Gavin, are you confessing your feelings? I asked. No, he said. This is a business proposal. Then why are your ears red? He didn't answer. In June, we got together. It wasn't some romantic scene. It was at the office, working overtime until dawn, when he helped me revise the title of an article, 17 versions. When he sent the last one, I saw it differed from his first draft by just one word. Are you messing with me? I asked. No, he said. I just wanted you to confirm for yourself that the first version was the best. I looked at him and suddenly smiled. Gavin, do you like me? He was silent for 3 seconds. Yes. Just like that. No build-up, no confession, no I'm not good with words. Just a single yes, and ears red enough to bleed. Then let's be together, I said. Okay. This was how we began. Not romantic, not grand, nothing like what you see on TV. But for me, it was enough. In our first month together, we had a fight. The reason was trivial. He had to go on a sudden business trip over the weekend, and I had already bought movie tickets. He said he'd reschedule, I said don't bother. Then we fell silent. The Cold War lasted 2 days. On the 3rd day, he came to my place, standing at the door with a bag of fruit in his hand. I was wrong, he said. Wrong about what? You shouldn't have changed your mind at the last minute. And? He thought for a moment. I shouldn't have not told you in advance. And? He thought again. That's it. I looked at him. He really didn't know. It wasn't an act, he genuinely had no idea. In his eyes, he had already apologized, admitted his mistake, and brought fruit over. That was enough. He didn't know what I wanted him to say I missed you, to say it won't happen again, to say you're more important than work. But he wouldn't say it. Because that's just the kind of person he is. His ex-wife was right, he's a suitable life partner, but not a suitable lover. Gavin, I said, do you know why your ex-wife left you? His expression shifted. It's not because you're busy. It's because you never say I need you, I said. You handle everything too well, work, life, relationships, all of it flawlessly. But you make the people around you feel like you don't need anyone. He fell silent. I need you, he said, his voice low. What? I need you, he repeated, louder this time. Samantha, I need you. Otherwise, I wouldn't read your public account every day, wouldn't sign with your studio, wouldn't be here telling you all this. He looked at me, his eyes red. I'm not good with words, he said. But everything I do because you're here. If you weren't, I wouldn't bother doing any of it. I stood there, suddenly wanting to cry. Not because I was moved. But because I finally understood him. He couldn't speak sweet nothings. But every business proposal he made, every data calculation he ran, every draft he helped me edit, those were his love confessions. His way of expressing wasn't through words, but through actions. And it took me 2 months to understand that. Gavin, I said, next time we argue, can you just hold me? Don't say you're wrong, don't buy fruit, just hold me. He walked over and hugged me. Tightly. Okay, he said. In August, Lucas succeeded on his second try and got into graduate school. Vivian told me. She saw it while scrolling through posts, a photo of his admission letter, captioned thankful for this past year. Vivian asked if I wanted to congratulate him. I thought about it and said no. It wasn't out of hatred, nor was it to avoid suspicion. It was truly because I felt his path had nothing to do with mine anymore. That same month, Vanessa opened a flower shop in another city. Lindsay said her posts often featured photos of flowers, and she seemed to be doing well. I clicked into her post and took a look. She had cut her hair short, gotten a tan, and looked lovely when she smiled. I gave her a like. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just that I felt she had been through a lot too. We had both loved the same person, both spent too much time on him. Only I woke up first, and she took a little longer. We've both moved on now. And that's enough. In October, Gavin's mother came to Beijing. She didn't give any notice beforehand and came straight to the company. When the front desk girl called me, I was in the middle of writing a draft. Samantha, there's an older lady looking for Mr. Gavin, says she's his mother. When I went downstairs, I saw a woman in her 50s standing at the front desk, dressed simply, with her hair neatly pinned up. When she saw me, she looked me up and down. You're Samantha? She asked. Hello, Auntie. My son says you're very capable, she said. I've seen plenty of capable women. Being capable doesn't mean you're fit for a settled life. I smiled. Auntie, you're right. Being capable and living a settled life are two different things. She looked at me for a few seconds. You're not angry? I'm not angry, I said. What you said is the truth. She was silent for a moment. Gavin didn't like to talk much when he was little. I took him to see a doctor, who said it wasn't autism, just his personality. He doesn't say things, but he remembers them all in his heart. His ex-wife couldn't stand it and left. Can you? I thought about it. Could I not stand it? When we argued, he wouldn't say a word for ages, and I'd get so mad I wanted to smash things. He never told me when he was going on a business trip. I thought he'd forgotten, but later I realized he just didn't think it needed mentioning. He never said I love you. The one time he said I need you used up all his quota. But when I couldn't take it anymore, he would hold me. He learned. Though he learned slowly, he was really learning. Auntie, I said, it's not that he won't talk, it's that he doesn't know how. If he doesn't know, he can learn. There are things I don't know either, and he's teaching me. Auntie looked at me for a long time. Then she smiled. You're smarter than his ex-wife. She only knew how to get angry, not how to teach. That night, Gavin asked me, did my mom give you a hard time? No, I said. Your mom's fine. What did she say? She said I'm smarter than your ex-wife. He paused for a moment, then laughed. It was that rare, wholehearted kind of laugh. You are smarter than my ex-wife, he said. You chose me. Narcissist. It's not narcissism, it's a fact. He looked down at the documents. You chose me, not because I'm good. It's because you're good enough to dare to choose someone who isn't. I looked at him. Outside the window, it had grown dark, and the streetlights were coming on. I suddenly remembered the smell of disinfectant on the hospital bed the day I was reborn. That smell was pungent and cold, reminding me how hard it was to be alive. But now, what I smelled was gardenias. The pot he had planted on the balcony had bloomed. In the spring of 2020, my public account broke through 500,000 followers. When I was publishing my second book, the editor asked me to write a preface. I wrote many versions, and in the end, I chose the shortest one. This book isn't about teaching you to become a better version of yourself. That idea of a better self is too exhausting. This book simply wants to tell you that you are already good enough as you are. On the day of the book launch, Gavin sat in the last row. A reader asked me, will you still write about love? I said, yes. But I won't write only about love anymore. Why? Because love isn't everything. When you have a career, friends, hobbies, a cat, and a balcony full of flowers, love becomes just one part of it, not the whole. That ratio matters. Someone in the audience laughed. After the press conference ended, Gavin walked over and handed me an envelope. What's this? Open it and see. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. October 2015, Haitian Hospital, Surgical Ward Corridor. A young man in a hospital gown stood in front of a vending machine, holding a can of coffee. In the background, a girl walked past the nurse's station, and 4 cannula in her hand, carrying a magazine. That girl was me. That man was Gavin. Where did you get this photo? I asked. It's always been in my phone, he said. That day, you walked right past me, and I didn't call out to you. Because I thought I was just a patient in the hospital, and you were just a passerby. I looked at him. And then? After I was discharged from the hospital, I never saw you again. Until that day at the sharing session, you were standing by the window, and I recognized you at first sight, he said. Samantha, I've been waiting for you for 4 years. Not deliberately waiting, but in these 4 years, I've met many people, yet not one of them made me feel like she's the one. I held the photo, my fingers trembling slightly. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because it doesn't matter, he said. What matters is that you're here now. I looked at myself in the photo. 21 years old, just out of an appendectomy, pale-faced, but with light still in my eyes. Back then, I didn't know what lay ahead of me. Didn't know I would meet Lucas, didn't know I would get hurt, didn't know I would start over. But that girl, as she walked over, didn't look back. She didn't know someone was watching her. Didn't know that 4 years later they would be together. Didn't know that this person would accompany her down a very, very long road. I put the photo away and looked up at him. Gavin. Thank you for waiting for me. He looked at me, his ears turning red again. I wasn't waiting for you, he said. It just happened to be you. The sunlight outside the window was beautiful. The gardenia on the balcony had bloomed for a second time. I turned around and continued writing the draft. He sat beside me, helping me revise the titles. This time, we revised it 6 times. The final version differed from the first by only 1 word. But we both knew this version was good. Not because that 1 word had been changed, but because we had tried.